Assalamu alaikum. Hope all of you are doing well. Welcome to the third video. If you haven't watched the previous two videos, make sure you watch them before coming here. This is page number 21. The love that my grandmother received from all her children and grandchildren must have been the reason why all her mental facilities were fully intact when she died at the age of 100. She might have lived longer, but when my mother died in 1985, she simply could not get over the loss, my mother being the youngest child. It almost seemed as if she decided it was time for her to go. She refused to get out of bed, and 3 months after my mother's death, she passed away. In Pakistan, family is everything. Islam strengthens the family system by making the role of the mother sacred. In the words of Holy Prophet, peace be upon him, paradise lies under the feet of the mother. And the greatest influence on my life was my mother. There were 5 of us, and I was the only son. She was a complete mother, happy to sacrifice all her pleasures for her family. I remember I would hide injuries from her just not so as not to pain her. Once, when I was 8 years old, my cousin and I were raiding someone's mulberry garden. Suddenly, the gardener came. While trying to jump from the tree, I slipped and fell on a branch. The sharp stick pierced a couple of inches in my thigh, almost rupturing my main artery. When I was taken home, I refused to show the wound to my mother because I could not bear to see her suffer. So great was my love for her that I hated to do anything that would annoy her. This is how love imposes discipline. She would make me do my homework every day, but I was so single-minded about sport that I would be uninterested in my studies. It was only her efforts that kept me going. However, apart from my homework, my mother would never push me to do anything if I didn't want to do it. As its name suggests, there is a park in the middle of Zaman Park, where all us cousins ranging from children to adults in their 20s would play cricket and hockey. Matches would be played with such aggression that one year visiting hockey teams refused to play us. My passion for cricket, along with partridge shooting, developed thanks to my uncles and cousins. My mother's family was passionate about cricket. I was inspired to become a test cricketer at the age of 9 when I saw my older cousin Javed Burki score a century against England at what is now the Qazafi Stadium in Lahore. I used to treat my aunts and uncles' houses as my own, as all social life revolved around the family, with my grandfather's and brothers' houses as the focal points. At family dinners, everyone would be there, from babies to the oldest members of the family. The rule of etiquette were clearly defined. Age was to be respected. The older the family member, the more respect they were accorded. When the elders spoke, all the younger members listened attentively. In turn, the elders took personal responsibility for all the children. Hence, the member of the younger generation could be disciplined by any elder, not just their parents. Any rudeness to an elder meant disapproval from all the senior members of the family. Unfortunately, among the westernized elite in Pakistan, the respect for age is diminishing. Some who are uncritically adopting Western culture almost consider a lack of respect for the age a sign of progress. I remember how odd I found it when my tutor at Oxford asked me to call him by his first name. It was even more awkward for me when my friends' parents would also insist that I did the same. Our value system was also moduled by the attitude of the elders. The younger members would carefully observe what was approved and what was condemned by the seniors. It was never the fear of being punished that made all of us follow family etiquette, but the fear of everyone's disapproval. Moral standards were high because immorality would have meant being ostracized. The greatest fear was to give a bad name to the family. Everything depended upon the reputation of a family, from arranged marriages to social acceptability. Any slight by an outsider on the character of a family member would mean an immediate closing of ranks by an united family front. It also put immense responsibility on family members to conform to certain moral and ethical standards. When I became a successful test cricketer and gave interviews to the press, I would be extremely conscious of what I was saying, as I constantly worried about how my extended family would react to my comments. Like most Muslim children, I grew up with religion. My mother used to tell us bedtime stories, each one with a moral message about Moses and the arrogant Pharaoh, and Joseph and the treacherous brothers, and of course about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. We were also taught about Jesus, considered in Islam to be a messenger of God like Muhammad, peace be upon him. Muslims believe that God had previously revealed his message for mankind to the prophets of the Jews and the Christians, but that Muhammad, peace be upon him, perfected the religion. first revealed to Abraham, Muhammad, peace be upon him, is seen as the seal of the prophecy, the last in the series of the prophets God sent to the world. Islam recognizes the teachings of the Jewish Torah and the Christian Bible, and while it teaches that Jews and Christians have, in some areas, strayed from the true path, it acknowledges them as the people of the book. Every night before going to sleep, my mother would make us say our prayers and tell me stories about the Prophet, peace be upon him. There was one particular story my mother would tell me. An old Meccan came before the Prophet, peace be upon him, and said to him, "The only reason I want to become a Muslim is because all my clan has converted to Islam, but I am too old to change my habits. Tell me one thing I can do so that I can become a Muslim but keep my habits." The Prophet, peace be upon him, replied, "Tell the truth. That is one thing you need to be a Muslim." The story appealed to me as a boy because I too found the rituals to be cumbersome. Besides, I could never lie to my mother, as she would always catch me out by simply looking at my face. My mother also told me how her father, Ahmad Hassan Khan, modeled himself on the Prophet, peace be upon him, and would tell me stories about how whatever he did, he would always tell us this is what the Prophet, peace be upon him, did, even to the point of liking honey and dates. The concept of heaven and hell was made clear to me ever since I can remember. The only problem was that I could not understand heaven. My poor mother frequently had to answer questions like, would I be able to play cricket in heaven? And would I be able to shoot? When I was 7 years old, a Maulvi Islamic scholar came to teach me and my sisters the Quran in Arabic. In school, we had a religious knowledge class, and our daily assembly started with a verse of the Quran. Every Friday, I went with my father to the mosque. On Eid, the two biggest festivals of the Muslim calendar, all the males of the Zaman Park, young and old, would go to the shrine of the great 16th century Sufi saint Mir Sahib. Mir is also a legendary figure for Sikhs who come to pray at his shrine in Lahore. Our family graveyard is outside the shrine, so after Eid prayers, we would go to our relatives' graves and pray for the departed souls. Such shrines are common in the subcontinent where Islam was spread from the 9th century onwards, in large part through the Sufis. The egalitarian message and doctrine of love, peace, and compassion appeal to the poor and dispossessed. The Sufis' tolerance of other religions and cultures meant that as they made their way through what became the Islamic world, the religion they spread, blended with local customs, become a kind of populist Islam. Their followers made shrines of their graves, which became places of pilgrimage. Rich and poor alike still flock to these shrines to pray and make offerings once a year, usually on the anniversary of the saint's death. There is an Urs, a festival, where prayers are accompanied by devotional dancing and singing and the distribution of food. This is the kind of Islam that the austere Wahhabi branch, which has influenced the Taliban, opposes. My parents were both easygoing Muslims who always taught us that Allah was the most beneficent and the most merciful. We were never forced to read our prayers or fast. At Ramadan, the month when Muslims fast from sunrise to sunset, it was we children who would choose to compete with each other to keep our fasts. I kept my first fast around the age of 9 and was rewarded with presents from my father and mother. If there was anything said against Islam, both my parents would defend it vigorously. My mother's extended family was originally from Barki Pashtun tribe in Kaniguram, the biggest town in South Waziristan, which rests in a fertile valley close to the Afghan border in the tribal areas. She instilled in me a pride that Pashtuns had never been subjugated and had constantly fought the British. Her family had ended up living in 12 fortresses known as Basti Pathan near the town of Jalandhar, where she took most pride in saying my grandfather had horsed Jinnah, southeast of Amritsar, only 40 miles or so away from Lahore, but in what became India. The whole family had immigrated to Lahore at partition, although none of them had been killed. When they moved out in a convoy, the 6 gangs who were massacring the Muslims in Punjab believed wrongly that they were armed and left them alone. My father's family were also Pashtuns, also known as Pathans, but from the Niazi tribe, which had come to India with invading Afghan tribes around the 15th century. Much of his family still lived in Miawali, a town on the river Indus, on the border with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, formerly known as Northwest Frontier. And the family ties are still very strong there. In time among the Burkis, the mother's tribe, the family system will begin to weaken, and my children will all know their first cousins. But in Miawali, even third cousins know each other. I frequently meet Niazis who will tell me how they are related to me through my great-grandfather. Village communities have stronger family systems than urban ones. In a place like Miawali, people often operate as a part of a family group of maybe 100 people. There is a network of siblings and first, second, and third cousins. Everything is shared. salaries, responsibilities, friendships, enemies, hardships, and successes. When people from rural areas go to look for jobs in the cities, the first people they contact are their relatives. If there are none, then they seek out people from their village or tribe. Millions of people have been displaced by fighting or floods in recent years, but you do not see hordes of hungry, homeless people sleeping on the streets of Pakistani cities. Many have been absorbed by the family and tribal network. People with little have taken in, fed, clothed, and housed people with still less than them. All this, of course, helps free the country's rulers and elite from bearing the burden of so many displaced people, let alone the responsibility of paying taxes and implementing any kind of effective welfare system. As I have so often observed in Pakistan, the poor have taken the blow for the rich. Growing up in Lahore, I became aware of two strong prejudices. One was against colonialism. This, according to my mother and father, was the ultimate humiliation for a people. At bedtime, my mother would tell me stories of resistance to the British, about heroes like Tipu Sultan, the tiger of Mysore, who died defending his city when he was attacked by three armies, the British, the Nizam of Hyderabad, and the Marathas, in 1805. At the same time, she would contemptuously relate the story of the surrender of the last Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar, who died in 1862 in captivity in Burma. She would quote the Tipu Sultan's remark, "The day of a lion is better than 1,000 of jackal." The general thinking in the Indian subcontinent is that the greatest damage inflicted by colonialism was material. There is no doubt the subcontinent did suffer in such a way. In the 1700s, the GDP of India was almost 25% of the world's economy. By the time the British left, it was around 2%. The British lawyer Cornelius Walford estimated in 1879 that there had been 34 famines in the previous century or so of the British rule, but only 17 in the preceding 2,000 years. M.J. Akbar writes the Mughal response to famine had been good. Governance, embargo on food export, anti-speculation regulation, tax relief, and free kitchens. If any merchant shortchanged a peasant during a famine, the punishment was an equivalent weight in flesh from his body. That kept hoarding down. Millions died in these catastrophes. A materialist lobby feels that the British rule gave India a strong administrative system along with an infrastructure of roads and railways. Up to a point, this is true as well. In my opinion, the greatest damage done to the people of the Indian subcontinent was in the humiliation of slavery and the consequent loss of self-esteem. The inferiority complex that is ingrained in the conquered nation results in its imitation of some of the worst aspects of the conquerors, while at the same time neglecting its own great traditions. It destroys the originality as the occupied people strive only to imitate the occupiers. Furthermore, this slavish mimicry wrecks any sense of leadership in the elite, the people with the most expensive education in the country. One of the Iqbal's great qualities was that he provided such new and original thought despite having lived his entire life under colonial rule. In a well-known verse, he told his son, "My way is not one of being wealthy, but of fakiri, spiritual poverty. Your khudi, selfhood, do not sell. In poverty, make a name." The legacy of colonialism led to our other prejudice against India. We as a nation felt we had been cheated out of Kashmir by the pro-Indian last Viceroy of India, Lord Louis Mountbatten. Hatred against our neighbor in Punjab especially reached its height in the 1950s and the 1960s, since so many Muslims had migrated from East Punjab at partition in 1947, and hardly a family had not lost loved ones in the bloody massacres during the border crossing. It was only later when I toured India playing cricket that I realized how much we have in common and lost this prejudice. Islam, we were told, was tolerant, and it had spread in the subcontinent not by force of arms but by the great Sufi saints such as Khwaja Muniuddin Chishti, known as Gharib Nawaz, the benefactor of the poor, who lived in the North India in the late 12th century and early 13th century, who won people over with their humanitarian message. Sufis were held in such esteem that in 1303, when a Mongol army under Tari laid siege to Delhi, Sultan Alauddin Khilji appealed to the great Sufi saint Nizamuddin Aulia for help. Since both my parents had Hindu and Sikh friends from school and college before independence, we were never taught to hate people from other religions. There was no militant fundamentalism in those days, and those few who could be classified as religious by gods were not taken seriously. We were told, however, that Islam was the superior religion since the Quran had been dictated to the Prophet, peace be upon him, by God himself, whereas the other holy books had been written by man, and so human faults had slipped in. Muhammad, peace be upon him, was unlettered. He therefore had to ask other people to write down the message he received from God. Apart from being a book of wisdom, the Quran is still considered the greatest work of Arabic literature, and the beauty of its words has converted many, including the great Caliph Umar, one of the Meccans most opposed to the new religion being preached by Muhammad, peace be upon him. Umar was at the forefront of plans to assassinate the Prophet, peace be upon him. But according to Muslim traditions, when he heard his sister recite from the book, his heart softened. He wept, and Islam entered into him. He went on to become one of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, main companions, inheriting leadership of the Muslims after his death. The only time I truly understood what the Caliph might have experienced was when I took my sons once to the Faisal Mosque in Islamabad for Friday prayers. A visiting imam from Egypt was delivering the khutbah, the sermon. Often you sit there during the sermon and become lost in your own thoughts because you cannot understand the Arabic. But when the imam started reciting, I was immediately struck by the sound that gently filled the whole mosque. Looking around, I saw that as his voice resounded through the building, it was having the same effect on other worshippers. It was like listening to a classical symphony. It gave me goosebumps. I have never heard anything like it before or since, not even in the two great mosques of holy cities of Mecca or Medina. Islam is not just a religion to be practiced privately by individuals, but a way of life. The Quran lays out clear rules for how a society should be governed and guidance on how people should behave. I was taught it was also a forgiving religion that laid special emphasis on justice and compassion. There were many challenges, most of all the incendiary issue of Kashmir. In 1965, when I was just 13, war broke out for the second time since independence. I will never forget this period. Late one evening, we started hearing the sound of bombardment and the windows began to shake. From a rooftop, we caught sight of the flashes of explosions along the border. I remember the anxious faces of my parents as the bombardment continued all night. The Indian army was advancing towards Lahore. There were rumors that Indian paratroopers might land in the city, and the patriotic fever gripped the country. The elders of Zaman Park were called to my uncle's house for a kind of council of war. It was decided that my older cousins should group together in civil defense force to defend Zaman Park. I was itching to be a part of the force and armed with the 22 rifle that my father had just given me for the birthday. I marched out to join them only to be sent back and told I was too young. I cursed myself for not being old enough to join in. Along with my mother and sisters, I was sent away from the city for my safety. As we approached Pindi, I remember seeing open areas outside the city swarming with warriors from the tribal areas volunteering to assist the army. Later, I found out that my overzealous cousins almost ambushed, shot, and killed two innocent people, mistaking them for Indian paratroopers. Everyone in the country was united in a desire to defeat the enemy. I don't think Pakistan had ever witnessed such unity. The nearest thing to it was perhaps when we won the World Cup in 1992. As I grew up, I developed a passion not only for my country but also for the Pakistani countryside. Every summer, I would go with my parents and sisters to go to the hill stations to escape the oppressive heat of Punjab. I can still remember the thrill I felt as the car slowly ascended in the mountain road and the air cooled. Only those who have experienced the intense heat of Punjab summer can understand such relief. There was no air conditioning in those days. We had picnics and walks in the forest, saw monkeys, jackals, porcupines, and a huge variety of birds. Occasionally, we even saw the tracks of a leopard. Once, when I was about 5 years old, during a trip to the hill station Dunga Gully, over 200 miles to the northwest of Lahore, a leopard killed a donkey right outside our rest house in the middle of the night. I can still recall how fascinated I was by the poor donkey's partially eaten corpse. In the winter, I went partridge shooting with my uncle and male cousins in the Salt Range, a low mountain range about 2.5 hours drive west of Lahore. Some of my best childhood memories are of these trips. We stayed in colonial rest houses in the wilderness, ate sumptuous picnic lunches, and returned in the evening to relax around a log fire. The salt range used to teeming with wildlife: wolves, leopards, hyenas, jackals, foxes, deer, and wild sheep. There are fewer animals now, but the salt range remains my favorite place for shooting partridge because of its beautiful weather in the winter and hilly terrain. My mother also loved wildlife and the mountains, and she fueled my passion for telling me stories from her childhood. Some were set in the Indian hill stations of Simla, the summer capital of the British Raj, and the beautiful Himalayan station of Dalhousie, where she would holiday with her parents. Like most small boys, I was intrigued by the more grisly tales. I particularly liked the one about how her dog was taken by a leopard while her father was posted at Kesar in the Salt Range. I also loved the family legend of my father's side about how my great uncle from Miyawali, a policeman, had fought with the leopard that had been terrorizing the local villagers and killed it with the bayonet of his gun. Then spent 6 months in hospital. From the mauling he received, he was given the highest award the police could bestow. The 1965 war over Kashmir ended in 17 days, but it left the military dictator President Ayub Khan in a vulnerable state, allowing room for democratic development as his grip on power slipped, leading to the rise of a new political party, the Pakistan's People's Party. Under its leader Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, Bhutto had studied at university in California and Oxford before he became a lawyer in London, and he represented Pakistan at the United Nations before being appointed the country's foreign minister in 1962, when he was only 34. After the war, he fell out with the president and left the government to form the PPP. Bhutto, like so many who come to power in Pakistan, was seen at first as someone who could lead us back to democracy, but later was to prove its opposite. Here was a man who understood history, one with exceptional mind, highly educated and charismatic. Bhutto could have changed Pakistan completely. He was a true Pakistani nationalist. He formed the first national grassroots political party in Pakistan. However, he had a fatal flaw in his character that undermined all that he could have achieved. His feudal mindset couldn't tolerate dissent, and as a result, his government became known for its brutality in victimizing the opponents. But his ideas, which he expressed in his 1967 book, The Myth of Independence, carried great weight and still do. It is a great shame that he himself could not live up to all of his words. He called the story of all the civilizations of the world, from ancient Egypt to the British and the French empires, the story of greed, urging domination and colliding with the struggle for equality. And he noted that domination has been justified as the survival of the fittest. It has been given the name of the white man's burden today. That ancient struggle has been epitomized in the creed of democracy against dictatorship. And most precisely, he remarked that 20 years of independence have revealed to the people of Pakistan and India the sharp difference that really exists between independence and sovereign equality. This was the beginning of neo-colonialism. If it no longer became necessary to control the destinies of smaller countries by any other jurisdiction over their territories. The British had developed neo-colonialism in India in the previous century in the princely states, of which there were over 500, where they didn't have to rule directly as they had puppet rulers to do their bidding. Today in Pakistan, with drone attacks and raids in our cities, our sovereignty is compromised by those who are puppets of the US and have followed the US dictates against the interests of the people of the Pakistan. It is this aspect of neo-colonialism that is breeding extremism in Pakistan today. Back then, I was still young, a teenager, and in the late 1960s, I trekked in the Karakoram, the mountain range spanning the borders between Pakistan, India, and China. Some of my favorite holidays have been spent there. It is one of the best places for trekking in the world, with the greatest number of peaks over 24,000 feet, 7,300 meters, including K2, which is the second highest mountain on earth. It really is the roof of the world. I have never seen such natural beauty anywhere in the world as in the Domel Valley at 9,000 feet, where the army holds its skiing competitions in the winter. The valley floor was covered in red and white flowers and crossed by a crystal clear stream. It seemed to be the picture of paradise, and every morning I was there, I had to tell myself I wasn't dreaming. The people in the area of Pakistan were warm and friendly, untainted by tourism. On one trip, one of our two jeeps broke down on the Karakoram highway. A young man passing by offered to take us to the village for the night. We dirt tracked for about 40 minutes before ending up in a tiny village on the edge of an emerald-colored lake and surrounded by thick pine forest. The villagers served us delicious food, including the best mushrooms I have ever tasted. There was a full moon, and we sat all night by the lake listening to the wind blowing through the pines. Pakistan's northern areas are almost twice the size of Switzerland. Who knows how many such idyllic places still exist there. We came across similar hospitality in Hunza, a stunningly beautiful valley, supposedly the inspiration behind the mythical land of Shangri-La. When I first went there in 1967, locals, untouched by materialism, greeted us with apricots and peaches, inviting us to stay in their houses. Among the endangered species to be found in the Karakoram is the secretive snow leopard with its distinctive grey-green eyes, and I remember seeing snow leopard cubs found by a shepherd and presented as a gift for the Mead of Nagar, the ruler of what was until 1974 still a princely state located in the north of Gilgit-Baltistan, the most northerly point of Pakistan. Hunza used to be so remote it could only be reached via a terrifying journey up hairpin bends overlooking 1,000-foot drop in old Willys Second World War jeeps. Every so often, if you dared to look down, you would see the wreckage of a jeep that hadn't made it. Then came the Karakoram Highway, sometimes known as the ninth wonder of the world because of its elevation, the highest in the world for a paved road, and because of the sheer difficulty of building it. It took the Pakistanis and the Chinese 20 years to finish and cost the lives of almost 900 construction workers. The Karakoram is still by far the most beautiful mountain wilderness in the world, and the people are still friendly, but progress has taken its toll. The population explosion, massive deforestation by the timber mafia, and package tours are quietly threatening this paradise. Sadly, the modern world has brought unwelcome changes to many parts of Pakistan. Among those changes is the rapid increase in the population, which has grown from 40 million in 1947 to 180 million by 2011. The beauty and the wilderness of our country is fast disappearing, but it was already evident in the 1950s and the 1960s that this is one of the problems that would bed evil Pakistan. These problems began in the very fabric of the state itself, born out of our slavish adherence to the traditions and institutions of the departing British. Far from shaking off colonialism, our ruling elite slipped into its shoes. The more a Pakistani aped the British, the higher up the social ladder he was considered to be. In the Gymkhana and the Punjab Club in Lahore, Pakistanis pretended to be English. Everyone spoke English, including the waiters. The men dressed in suits, and we, the members' children, watched English films while the grown-ups danced to the Western music on a Saturday night. Indeed, some Pakistanis even spoke Urdu with an English accent and ate curry and chapatis with a fork rather than with their hands. While a native had to struggle to get membership of these clubs, any European would simply walk in. The waiters would not dare question whether he was a member or not. The Sindh Club in Karachi, the ultimate refuge of the self-loathing Brown Sahib, did not allow itself to be contaminated with any native Pakistani symbols. Established by the British in 1871, it resisted even Pakistani national dress, banning it until 1974. The small westernized elite, comprised mainly of civilian bureaucrats and military men, also inherited in the colonial contempt for the natives. Far from trying to implement Iqbal's vision, they took advantage of the colonial system meant to control the people. All the colonial institutions were left intact, and as a result, the only change for ordinary Pakistanis was that they had a new set of rulers, the Brown Sahib instead of the Gora White Sahib. Often these people were even more arrogant in dealing with the masses than the colonialist, just as a slave foreman were sometimes more brutal to the slaves than their masters were. A practice that continues to this day, we will see in Chapter 8 with the way the Pakistani security forces acted in the treatment of Afghans. Almost all the bureaucrats came from the elite English language schools built by the British and modeled on their own public schools. So that is it for this episode, as it is almost 30 minutes long. Thank you for watching this video. Do share this video with your friends, family, and don't forget to like, share and subscribe this video. Thank you for watching. Take care. Allah Hafiz.